the reality show. Today I've got Michael with me and Marco and Richard. How's it going, guys?
Very well,
Very
thank
good.
you.
Yeah, good. Thanks.
Eh,
Love. Fair enough. So we've got a couple of topics today. Our main one, we're going to be talking about UNRWA. We're going to expand a little bit more about the Gaza, sorry, the Hamas data center that was found under the UNRWA HQ. And we're going to talk a bit about the response to that, what we think about it, and so on and so forth. And there's also some trouble that's been going on with the Labour Party in the UK in a recent by-election, which is connected to anti-Semitism in Israel. So we're going to talk a little bit about that as well. Just before we start, though, Kirsten, just on the daily objective for anyone who didn't see, Kirsten gave us a super chat right at the end of the show. So just if there's anything more to say about that, just because I want to give her a proper answer, maybe we can say anything about that. Her super chat was pertaining to whether Egypt has been deliberately frustrating Israel's efforts since the beginning, since we were talking about the operation that's probably going to happen very soon in Rafah. Any more to say about that, Michael? Anything to say about Egypt's relations with Israel?
no, but to give Marco and Richard context, what her question was about impeding Israel by not allowing Palestinian refugees to come across the border.
Yeah. So, I guess there we go, Kirsten. You get some extra value. Mark and Richard, what do you think about Egypt's actions towards Israel? Do you think they've deliberately tried to slow things down, hinder them, or do you think that they're acting kind of fair enough in their own self-interest?
I think one of the reasons that Egypt doesn't open the borders because it doesn't want to be seen to help out Israel by allowing the Palestinians to clear the area and then Israel to finish the job. So Egypt seems to get indirectly or directly praise for the fact that it doesn't open the border from the very people who would flee through it to safety were they able.
Yeah, and to be honest, even in the past, the Israel rejected the Gaza Strip as their territory. So it's sadly surprised what's happening now, isn't it?
Mhm. Okie dokie. Well, let's go to the main topic then. So, this is the news which came out, which, as all good news, I first saw on Twitter, which is pertaining to this data center which the Israelis have discovered underneath the UNRWA headquarters in Gaza. And so, for anyone who hasn't seen the pictures, they've been published, so you can go find them of these kind of big servers that are in this quite small, cramped space with a small tunnel leading to them, and then there's pictures of these thick wires which are coming from the UNRWA headquarters and feeding down through the floor and leading down to the data center. So this data center, I'm lagging a bit. Can you guys still hear me?
Yeah, we can now. You've come back.
Okay, sorry. Um, so I don't know if you heard all that, but yeah, there's this data center beneath the UNRWA headquarters, and the data center was actually connected by these thick wires that were coming through the floor, leading down into the data center. So let's just talk about that a little bit. And Philippe Lazzarini, who is the kind of head of UNRWA, was saying that UNRWA had no idea that this was the case, that this is coming as a surprise. So Michael, let's go to you first. What do you think about this, and what do you think about the response from the head of UNRWA there?
Well, I think it's a further indictment of UNRWA, who have been promoting, anti-Jewish ideas, praised Hamas for their attack. Turns out that some people that actually in UNRWA were part of the attack, or some such thing as that. I don't know exactly, but I think they were part of the attack. Now they've got these tunnels underneath their building, and we don't know. I'm not, an engineer or anything like that, but it's strange credulity to think that these people are in their offices and there's tunnels being built underneath them and they're completely unaware of it. And as far as this guy, what's his name? Lazzarini?
Yeah.
Lazzarini, he's the head. Why isn't he resigning? If his claim is, well, we didn't know. Well, as the head of the organization, shouldn't you know what's going on within your organization, and shouldn't you be accountable? I was always taught that the head of whatever it is, a country, a football team, whatever, takes responsibility. I mean, who was it? Harry Truman. The buck stops here. With this guy, evidently the buck stops everywhere else, but with him, I think he needs to go.
Yeah. And excuse me. The thing that's been interesting with UNRWA's response generally to the criticism that's come of them since the beginning of the conflict, but also here, is that the people who are in charge of UNRWA seem to have really not taken any responsibility at all. When the reports were coming out, or when Israel gave information to UNRWA about these 12 employees, they did fire them. But in all other ways, they're refusing to acknowledge their failings, let's say, to put it mildly. And so I agree that it's strange that he hasn't resigned, and he's actively refused to, is part of this story as well. And some of their spokespeople have been going out and have been not just trying to defend UNRWA, but have been actively combative against any criticisms of them. They haven't said, "Look, we've failed in various ways. We need to do better," which wouldn't be sufficient. But they haven't even been really doing that, which has been strange. So, Marco and Richard, what did you guys think about all this?
Yeah, well, I don't think it's strange at all. I mean, a corrupt individual in a corrupt organization will behave in a corrupt way. So why should he resign? Why should he admit it's his fault? Here we're talking about over half a mile long tunnel which connects the ground of the UNRWA HQ to an UNRWA school, as I said, just over half a mile away. Okay, let's drop a few IQ points here, and let's assume that because the tunnel was about 50 feet deep, they really couldn't hear or see that the Hamas guys were digging it. But the problem here is that the tunnel had air conditioning to service the servers and the battery storage and all the equipment, which produces also heat. And those air conditioned units would have to come out to the surface. So those would have to be located within the compound of UNRWA. And all the cables that went in, the access points that go down to the tunnel from the UNRWA compound, really there's no reason to think that would have gone unnoticed by UNRWA official or people working in UNRWA. And the excuse that the head of UNRWA used, I don't know. It's no excuse at all. You either know about it and you are one of the most evil people on the planet, or you are totally incompetent who shouldn't really run a newsstand. Either way, the guy should go.
Yeah. For my part, this is not a smoking gun; it's a smoking cannon. And to be honest, even bigger than that cannon is the absolute, I don't know what's bigger than a cannon, a mushroom cloud of missing outrage over this fact. That's what I find absolutely shocking in this. The lack of coverage and focus on this is deafening. Whereas the risibly named BBC Verify team, when it comes to this story, for example, I think. One of the reasons for that is that this is real physical evidence. So in previous stories, when a cache of weapons is found behind a scanner inside a hospital, there's the accusation that it's a plant. It's just been put there just prior to filming for the photos, or when Hamas operatives are shown in medical gear inside a hospital, it's talked away and as or when people say different things, that is not their intended meaning, or lots of obfuscation is thrown over it. But this is real physical evidence that cannot be put together quickly, has been there for a long time, and cannot be done in the total ignorance of all the people who claim to be ignorant of it. Not when it's within the perimeters of the UNRWA compound, not with all the cameras that exist, not with the fact that it is as long and extensive and thorough as it is, not the fact that it links to another UNRWA school. All of these are just damning facts, and the refusal to look at them is what tells you more than the refusal to resign. I think here, I think the key thing that's going on is that what is being attacked is humanitarianism, is altruism. So all of its apologists are coming out and focusing on that aspect, that the ends justify the means when it comes to humanitarianism, and therefore we cannot tolerate anything which throws that kind of thinking into a negative light, which this so clearly does.
Yes, and so just since we've been talking a bit about Philippe Lazzarini, he tweeted out just 3 days ago in response to this. He says, one, UNRWA didn't know what is under its headquarters in Gaza. He said, two, UNRWA is made aware of reports through the media regarding a tunnel under the UNRWA headquarters in Gaza, and that three, UNRWA staff left its headquarters in Gaza City on the 12th of October following the Israeli evacuation orders. So he's completely denying that they had any knowledge of this. Multiple times he's denying this. And this is just to reiterate the point. It's extraordinary that he's doing that as if it's a defense, because presumably he must have never been to those headquarters. UNRWA, has its sort of headquarters locations, even though he's Swiss, maybe they have some kind of office in Switzerland. As I understand it, I think UNRWA has its headquarters in Jordan. So it's not like he was very far away. And presumably he, nor any of the employees who were working in that building, so the claim goes, would have had any notion that their electricity was being leached off to these data centers. No one must have noticed that black hole in their spending. And of course, that is itself an indictment of his leadership, and he should resign just on that fact. If you really didn't know that a terrorist group was making use of your facilities in order to do whatever they're doing with this data center, then that itself is enough evidence to resign, and let alone the fact that probably people in your organization and possibly even you did in fact know about it. So that's something, just the fact that this guy hasn't resigned and hasn't been pushed out by UN is just extraordinary. But you mentioned, Richard, the kind of reporting on this with the BBC verified team. I don't know if you guys got to have a look at the Al Jazeera article that I sent you, but what was interesting, I'm sorry guys, I've got this cough coming up all over me. But the Al Jazeera article, let me just pull up its title, exactly what it said. It said, the way Al Jazeera described this was, UNRWA refutes Israeli implications of Hamas tunnel below Gaza HQ, which I thought was a really extraordinary title, because they've done no such thing. They may have denied it, but that UNRWA refutes, which means kind of proves false, the Israeli implications of a Hamas tunnel below the Gaza HQ, I thought was just extraordinary. So there's a real effort by some people in the media, and Al Jazeera are the worst example of this, to really exonerate UNRWA as an organization, when there's so much evidence coming out. And your point's an interesting one, Richard, in the sense that this is real physical evidence. And although Al Jazeera are never going to be convinced, something that I want to see but haven't seen is that the people in the media who've been defending UNRWA, who have said that they're defunding as a kind of tragedy and so on and so forth, whether they'll really see this, which is a really undeniable connection, whether they'll really accept, okay, UNRWA has to go, UNRWA's got to be defunded, UNRWA has to be torn down, rebuilt, or whatever. But it'd be really interesting to see whether they actually believe that, or if they come to that way of thinking. Michael, anything more to say?
Well, while it is physical proof, right? One, people can deny it and just say it's a plant, it's fake footage, whatever. Or they can say UNRWA didn't know about it, or they can say only a few knew about it. What I find the most interesting about it is this Lazzarini fella. I believe he said that no one within the organization knew about this. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe he said that, right? So this guy is going to tell us that he's so unaware of what's going on that he didn't know tunnels were being built under his building, but he's so wise that he knows the thoughts and the knowledge of every single human being that's a part of his organization. I mean, it's just absurd.
Yes, no, well, exactly, and that's a good point. And Mark and Richard?
I mean, this is so preposterous. It's even hard to take seriously, really. His so-called defend, I didn't know. I mean, this is as believable as the Pope not knowing about child abuse going on in his churches. Yeah, he might not know exactly who's digging the hole in the ground, but surely he knew that Hamas is active under his own feet, because if anything else, in the past, there were instances where Hamas was found to have used UNRWA venues to store material, weapons and ammunitions. And so surely you would have some sort of checks in place that make sure your premises are not used by Hamas. But then again, you can prove as much evidence as you like. You can shove the BBC's face through the tunnel. They will still come out for Hamas ultimately. And you don't need more evidence. We know, we can see the people of Gaza not standing up to Hamas. Yes, 20 years ago they voted for them, and then they haven't had the chance to vote against them since. But how many of them stood up and said, this is a legitimate government, we're fed up of you? None of them. So why are we surprised that Hamas is active in Gaza? Why are we surprised that the hostages were held in a residential area in Rafah? Because Hamas is Gaza, Gaza is Hamas. UNRWA is covering for Hamas, and the UN is covering for UNRWA. You don't need an expert in logic to work out what the consequence is.
Yeah. Well, when it comes to the reporting, I think there were some really telling differences. For example, as preparation for this, we looked at two particular articles, didn't we? One was from Al Jazeera and one was from the Times of Israel. Now, I would encourage, if we're happy to do that, to stick in the chat or in the link below a copy of the Times of Israel article, because that is really thorough. That includes a lot of pictures. That includes a lot of information that I haven't seen to that extent anywhere else. And what is really telling about the Al Jazeera article is the absence of relevant photos. There are just two photos in that article of Al Jazeera, and there are basically UNRWA workers dealing with grain sacks and stuff like that, nothing to do with the story itself. Whereas no photos of tunnels, no photos of infrastructure, no photos of all the stuff that is clearly there in the Times of Israel article. Now, you cannot be honest and be doing that. You clearly have a motive in mind. And I came across another Al Jazeera article, which I think sort of starts to unpick what is really the thinking here. There was a quote in this other one, which says that Israel has long tried to eliminate UNRWA, the UN agency, which enshrines the right of Palestinian refugees to return home. So they protect UNRWA as an organization because they're protecting the concept that refugees are, in this loose, ridiculous definition that covers 7 decades, and wherever they live now and whoever is the descendant of previous refugees, they cover all of this under the auspices, the existence of UNRWA. So they defend UNRWA by trying to defend that principle, or if you can call it a principle, by defending that lie. Let's be honest about it, and that's what they're really trying to attack here. So it's really not surprising but it shows the entrenchment of all the camps in their respective positions, and that no fact of reality is going to shift.
Yes. So that's another thing which we've seen a lot in the response to the UNRWA stories, particularly with the stories which have been coming out over the last few weeks, but then particularly with this story as well, which is that when a news source which is anti-Israel, either slightly or very much so in the case of Al Jazeera, something that gets brought up is, oh, Israel has been anti-UNRWA for decades. And so this is just another thing in this long line of efforts to oppose UNRWA. And which is an amazing act of evasion, really, because it's completely discounting and completely throwing out all of the evidence that we're seeing coming out right now, which is very condemning and which is very convincing, which is completely condemnatory of UNRWA. And in that kind of slight statement of, oh, Israel's been doing this for a long time, don't think anything more about it, they're able to just hand wave all this away as if it weren't really, really important that we know this about a UN organization, which is being funded by the citizens of countries within the United Nations. So it's being funded by anyone watching this, presumably. So that's what's extraordinary about this. And then also, one of the people interviewed in the Times of Israel article, who is a colonel in the IDF, and he stresses that the tunnels would have been built over years, that they were so kind of, I guess, sophisticatedly built, or in a sense so long, that it wouldn't have just been something that was thrown up in a week. This would have been years worth of effort. So again, it goes beyond credulity to believe that the employees in the UNRWA headquarters had no idea that this was there. So we need to take very seriously that UNRWA has been an act, not only has these 12 members of staff and then the reported actually 1,200 members of staff, but from the Israeli intelligence have been actively linked to or support or engaged with Hamas. But that they've been, that they've been the other people who are part of UNRWA as well would have been actively ignoring all of this, would have had some idea that this was going on, and would have been closing their eyes to it and closing their ears, and so would have been complicit in a moral sense. But we have a super chat, which I just want to read out. So we have $4 from Marilyn, thank you very much, and then $5 from Garbled Words, who says, "This is gaslighting of the highest order. How can the Israeli people coexist with these forces and sleep well at night? I feel heartbroken." I presume by these forces you're referring to UNRWA, I guess, or maybe you're referring to Hamas. I'm not sure. But I think basically the unfortunate fact for the Israeli people is that they can't sleep well at night. I think a lot of people in Israel that we've seen in the response feel very, I don't know how to say other than traumatized by October 7th and by the conflict breaking out. I think if you, the Times of Israel that we've been referring to have done a number of podcasts, which is called, I think the series is called something like What Happens Now or something like that. And some of them are with just with intellectuals or with standard Israelis. And the response very clearly is of a culture, I think, which is traumatized, which is very deeply upset by all of this. And so to your question, I don't think they do sleep well at night. I think this is something which, until the conflict is resolved, will be a continuing kind of trauma in the culture. But okay, guys, anything more to say about the UNRWA story?
Yeah, I think a couple of things I wanted to mention. One was the fact that finding this comes as part of the interrogations carried out by Shin Bet. And yesterday we were talking about photos of interrogations and stuff, and in the episode of the reality show yesterday. Now, interrogation is a very necessary means, and obviously we're talking about different ways it can be done, obviously, but finding information from your enemy in order to find the details of your enemy's operation in order to neutralize it is an essential part of any warfare. And clearly it's been that kind of effort that's led to the discovery of where these entrances are and the revealing of information like this. I think this also goes to suggest to me, my first reaction to this every time I see it was, I think that Hamas did not expect Israel to push as hard and firm as they have for as long as they have. They did not expect all of these secrets to be unearthed because they expected Israel to have shrunk back home long before this date. And the fact that Israel is pushing on and is gaining more territory that they can examine thoroughly above and below ground means that they can properly prove all of the truths that they've been saying for many years. And that's another aspect of this. UNRWA's been warned endlessly about Hamas operatives within it, about tunnels underneath all of Gaza. And you're saying you haven't really looked into those? Well, this only goes to prove that it's not Israel that's been lying. It's detractors who've been proved to be liars.
And what I thought it was quite interesting, there's an interview, a questioning from journalists from a separate event of Lazzarini. He's asked whether he should resign. And a couple of times he said, no, I shouldn't resign. But the kind of way he's talking, like with the certainty of the man who knows that it is protected, that his back is covered, and also this kind of massive delusion that is projecting about the importance of the work of UNRWA and how children in Gaza will go without education if he resigned. All this kind of crazy stuff, which makes me wonder whether he actually believes he's doing any good. He's morally so far gone that he doesn't even realize or even care that Hamas is actually using his organization to do what it's doing.
One of the things he said is he wanted UNRWA to carry on with a post-war education to educate traumatized boys and girls in what more anti-Jew sentiment as they have been before, and as the textbooks have been shown to eradicate Israel from the map that's being taught in UNRWA schools. I think the important thing is that UNRWA is, as the foreign minister Israel Katz said, it's not part of the day after. It cannot be part of any follow up to this conflict at all. And
Yes,
sorry, one last point. I'm all in favor at this point of the collective punishment of the UN as a whole. And I think because there's been enough evidence here that it spreads far and wide among the UN bodies. And it really is time that countries grew a backbone, grew a set of cojones, and started withdrawing from the UN and forming their own body of a decent countries that stand for the right values.
for sure. And the fact that higher ups in the UN have been so kind of reactively defensive of UNRWA, and that there hasn't been further ramifications up the chain. Maybe there will be once the conflict ends. We'll see. Though I'm not holding my breath about that. It's extraordinary that there haven't been these consequences. This is a UN agency. I appreciate that there's probably a degree of operational independence, but they're still a part of the UN. They're funded by the UN. He's appointed. Philippe Lazzarini, the head of them, is appointed by the UN. So there's a real culpability here. And I guess maybe just to hammer the point home, this information that we've been seeing coming out about UNRWA, whether it's the 12 members of staff and the potentially 1,200, or whether it's this data center, this is just the latest in a long line of information that we know about UNRWA. And what's been edifying to see is that UN Watch has been getting a lot of traction with their reports, but UN Watch has been releasing reports for years. I mean, just the other day I was having a look back at one that they released in 2017, which was about the curriculum in UNRWA schools. And so if people really cared, this information was there to be found. And so they could have done something and they didn't. Or so if people are acting a bit like that this is shocking information, well, maybe they generally didn't know, but it's partly that they really weren't looking, because it really
there's also one other point is that people are judging things based on what the decisions that their enemy or their opposition, when they've taken the opposite point of view, they're taking the opposite point of view to them every time. For example, Trump stopped the funding of UNRWA, and of course Biden reinstated it because Trump stopped it as much as anything. So how do you move on from this if people aren't prepared to look at the principles and the key elements involved in their decision making, rather than just doing the opposite of what the other guy did?
I think you just hit the nail on the head, is that there's no rationality, there's no rational standard of ethics, and there's no rational principles guiding anybody's behavior. Over here in America, we're getting ready to, have one or the other octogenarian president. Both are morally bankrupt. The policies are ridiculous, but that's what that's where we're going. I don't know how long this is sustainable, this level of irrationality. Maybe it's sustainable long term, as long as there's some rational people. I don't know, but it just seems like principles are out the window, and it's all about team sports now, where this is my team, so that's who I root for.
Yeah, and well, that's a very deep problem in our whole culture, really. That tribal mentality. And just briefly, this is a complete digression, but I haven't had a chance to ask any Americans about this. Michael, this kind of report that's come out about Biden saying that he's too mentally infirm to stand trial or whatever, has that had a big impact amongst Biden supporters, does it seem, or not at all?
From what I can gather, and I'm not, enmeshed in Biden circles, but it seems that the Democratic insiders are very concerned about it, and they should be. Of course, right after that news comes out, Trump goes out and says that if NATO doesn't pay his bills, he'll let Putin invade him, and who cares? And then that takes the attention off of Biden, because Trump just can't help himself. But to me, the more interesting dynamic here is this: if a special counsel comes out and says something bad about Trump, Then you have the Democrats who are all, look, this is what the special counsel's saying, and the Republicans say you can't trust these guys, it's just political. But much like when the media, says something, if the media or the special counsel says something against your enemy, now all of a sudden they're trustworthy. So I haven't heard not even one Trump supporter come out and say, well, I don't trust these special counsels anyway. They're political operatives. I don't buy it. But you can bet your life savings that if the special counsel investigating Trump came out and said this, they would all be saying that very thing. And it's just goes right back to the tribal stuff that we were just talking about. And it's very disheartening to me, very frightening.
Yes, and as we say, this is something that we see coming up with Israel as well. Just before we go on to our second topic, we have a couple more super chats. So we have $2 from Frank Grail, who asks, what addresses do returning Palestinians go to? And then we also have $4 from Jonathan. Thank you, Jonathan. Well, so Frank is, I guess, getting at this idea of the right of return, which maybe we should talk about a little bit. And I guess the idea with the right of return, I don't think it's meant literally in the sense that there are addresses for them to return to, although it is spoken of in a way which suggests that, I guess, which is maybe what you're getting at, Frank, because people talk about Palestinians returning to their homes. If we're talking about people who had to leave after the war of 1948, presumably those homes have either literally been destroyed or have had generations of other people living in them. So there aren't really those homes for them to return to, I wouldn't think. Michael, what do you make of the idea of the right of return?
Well, I just learned something today that I was unaware of, and that is that the concept of refugees normally only extends as far as the people that were actually refugees from a given place, whereas now the UNRWA is extending it to generations. Descendants are considered refugees. With the right of return, I mean, it seems silly to me. You have a right to return. After multiple wars have taken place, multiple expansions of territory, peace treaties, negotiations, and now you're going to return. But as far as the address, I don't know that that's that significant, because I'd imagine there's plenty of land in Israel and in places to live. My only concern with an objection like that is because if you say, well, where would they go? What's their address? If then somebody provides an answer, which they may be able to, then what do you say? Oh, but I don't want them there anyway. Well, then why'd you ask the question?
Sure. Mark and Richard, what do you make of the idea of the right of return?
Well, there's always the argument that Jordan occupies most of the land that Palestine was before, and therefore Jordan would be an answer to that. You've got to pass out, though, the various categories of so-called refugee we're talking about, and if most of those people are already living somewhere else anyway, and living perfectly decent lives in all sorts of different countries, so that aspect is relevant as well. And I think that the matter of having a state not being stateless, there's some argument there for ensuring that at the end of a full process, you have somewhere that is the state that you belong to. Where it physically is a slightly different matter.
I mean, the whole idea of right of return is totally balmy, to be honest. I mean, the place, I mean, people keep calling them Palestinian. Palestine was never a place. A few thousand years ago, it was invaded by Alexander the Great. So do Greek people in Macedonia have got the right to return? What about the Romans? They were actually named the place Syria-Palestina. That sort of thing is just balmy. The whole point is just to try and keep a wound open and never let it heal.
Yes, and to Michael's point about the definition of refugees that UNRWA supplies, it's basically anyone who lived in the area who was removed, but something between like May 1946 and May 1948, something kind of like very specific. Anyone who had to leave then as a result of the 1948 war is counted as a refugee, and then any of their descendants is also counted as a refugee, which is why the number only grows of Palestinian refugees.
I
And
wonder if I did like one of these family tree things or genetic
the
tests and looked into my history, right? And I found out that somewhere in my past, and my father was adopted, so I don't know what nationality I am on his side. And I find out that I was forced out of Ireland. Let's say my ancestors were forced out of Ireland back in the, whatever, the potato famine, right? Can I now say, well, I'm a refugee. I want to go to Ireland. Somebody provide me with the support to go there. It just seems asinine to me.
Well, given the stance that Ireland is taking on this thing, probably you should probably have the right to go to Hamas directly.
Yeah, Ireland's not been very good, but it's no, it's the fundamental point is right. And the example I always think of is of Edward Said, who's a big intellectual influential on a lot of the modern left, who kind of was one of the founders of post-colonial theory with his book Orientalism. He was born in Jerusalem in 1935, and his family and he had to leave after 1948. He came to the UK and then moved to America, where he was an English professor at Columbia University. And he was counted as a refugee for his whole life. Never mind the fact that he came to a safe country in the UK, lived a prosperous life, emigrated to America, and so on. To the day he died, I think in 2011 or 2001, something like that, he was counted as a refugee, no matter the fact that he was safe. And all of it, and his descendants as well, even though they never lived in the area, are refugees of this country as well. So it just becomes more and more ridiculous as time goes by. And unfortunately, as it says on the UNRWA website, in order to change the definition, the whole UN General Assembly has to pass a resolution to change that definition. So there's a huge kind of inertia against changing that.
And that's why the UN should be dissolved.
That's one reason amongst many. Okay, should we go to the secondary topic then?
Sure.
Daniel's asked something. Some countries actually do this. Portugal offers citizenship if you can prove you have Sephardic Jewish ancestry of someone who lived in Portugal in the past. That's interesting. I didn't know that.
I didn't either.
Yeah, that's interesting. Okay, so our secondary topic is to do with the Labour Party in the UK, who have a whole kind of history in recent decades of a problem with anti-Semitism, but that's been particularly focused on in the last 10 years. But the particular instance that we're talking about is in a by-election in Rochdale in the north of England. And their candidate, Azhar Ali, I think his name was, who's obviously been getting a lot of support because Labour has a real chance of winning this seat, made comments that Israel allowed October 7th to happen. And this was something that was revealed by, I think, an investigative reporter from the Mail on Sunday. And he has subsequently been dropped by Labour, who have been putting a lot of effort in the last however many years into kind of cleaning up their image and trying to push out these aspects of anti-Semitism. And there was a cartoon in the Times today that I saw of Keir Starmer trying to, kind of push away this candidate and say, no, look, I've cured us of all the anti-Semitism, and then this guy's still here. So Mark and Richard, you guys are in the UK. What did you think about this when you saw it?
So who's going to rip into the Labour Party first? Is it me? Fair enough. I think that what Starmer said when he got the leadership here was he was going to cut it out by the root, and it's not been done. It can't be done without looking more thoroughly at everybody who is involved in the Labour Party at all the different levels. And one of the problems is that the Labour Party groups people together by their religion, by like the left does all the time, in all sorts of groups as lumps. They treat them as lumps as voters. They treat them as lumps as people in every aspect of their life. What they individually think is irrelevant, they are a collective lump. And at the moment, it's clear that the lump that is the Muslim vote, if you want to call it that, is going to it is and seems to be in the main, not totally, because there are individuals within it, but in the main seems to be desperately pro-Palestinian in all of these discussions at every level, and that just comes to the surface repeatedly. And the Labour Party policy is quite clear at the moment, but they obviously don't agree with it. So that's what's coming out.
The fact that the new leader, Keir Starmer, represents a new direction for the Labour Party regarding anti-Semitism or anti-Jew sentiment is totally laughable. Let's not forget that just in 2019 there was a report which found the Labour Party guilty of breaking the law on equality, the Equality Act 2010, on two instances, on two occasions, on two different behaviors. Keir Starmer was on the cabinet of the Labour Party with Jeremy Corbyn. Keir Starmer, over at least two elections, campaigned for Jeremy Corbyn, who is a notorious anti-Semite. So are you telling me that Keir Starmer didn't know that the party was moving towards an anti-Semitic direction under Corbyn? Yet he chose to be on the front cabinet, and yet he chose to campaign for the anti-Semite in chief. Keir Starmer is the guy who actually managed to change Corbyn's stance on the EU. Corbyn was a natural Brexiteer, but Keir Starmer managed to made him change and become effectively a Remainer in the EU. Why couldn't he try to do the same about Corbyn's anti-Semitism? Why didn't he try to change the party from within the same way he did on different issues? That's why when they now say, "Oh, the Labour Party's changed, we're no longer anti-Semites," oh, come on, cut the crap. This is a load of bovine manure. Don't tell me for a second that the same people that were campaigning under Corbyn now suddenly they feel this pro-Israel feeling in the heart. The fact that majority of people voting for the Labour Party are actually Muslims who are feeling quite strong about this issue, and that they've shown in a number of occasions. It's just self-explanatory. It just shows you what the party is. It's just a farce, just a marketing campaign. If you fall for it, you're a fool.
Yes, and it would be interesting to know some of the internal Labour Party dynamics. I don't know if anyone's been writing about it, but since whilst Labour was led by Jeremy Corbyn and was then led by Keir Starmer about the changes, although there was the kind of investigation into anti-Semitism that was headed by Chami Chakrabarti, I'm not aware of any of kind of investigative reporting into the internal dynamics and the conversations that have been going on. Some of my friends who are in the Conservative Party tell me about that kind of thing, but I don't really have friends in the Labour Party, so I don't really know. So the guy who was dropped as the Labour candidate issued an apology, and he said the following: that October 7th was the greatest loss of Jewish life in a single day since the Holocaust, and Jews in the UK and across the world are living in fear of rising anti-Semitism. And he wants to urgently apologize to Jewish leaders for my inexcusable comments. So he's retracted to the comments now that he's been found out as having said them. But when he was comfortable and didn't know that he was being recorded, he felt happy to say that Israel allowed it to happen. So it's a bit too little too late, because what seemed to be his genuine belief was the former comments, not these ones now, which there's always something a bit insincere when a politician issues an apology after the fact, right? And this is a really damaging thing for Keir Starmer, because he's been shown to be in conflict with his own party a lot of the time surrounding Israel. His whole party is pushing for ceasefires, for actually to come out in favor of Palestine and to come out against Israel. And I think he basically understands that electorally that would be suicide, considering the opinion of most of the country doesn't align that way, and that he doesn't want the party to be seen as too lefty, because that's what hamstrung him last time under Jeremy Corbyn. And also he wants to avoid all this anti-Semitism stuff. And yet members of his own party keep bubbling up to kind of frustrate his efforts there. So there really is a deeper issue of this in the Labour Party. And although there was this investigation by Chami Chakrabarti, even her investigation, I don't think really did enough. Her report basically said, yes, there are signs of anti-Semitism in the Labour Party, but this is no worse than anti-Semitism in the UK generally, which is disheartening in the sense that it suggests that anti-Semitism is widespread within the UK. But also, that wasn't really enough accountability taking, I thought.
I think that says a lot about who Shami Chakrabarti hangs out with, to be honest, rather than anything else, because she was the head of the organization called Liberty, if I remember rightly, which is very similar to what's the big organization? The names have slipped my mind. The one that's always campaigning for free speech for all sorts of
ACLU.
I can't remember it anyway. But anyway, the point is, she was very much a lefty right from the beginning. When she was head of that organization, she was always acting as if she was neutral, and the whole organization was neutral, and the whole charity was neutral. But it was very much a lefty-oriented charity that was always trying to expose the right in all sorts of places and not examine the left in other areas. So it really came as no surprise that she was asked to do the report in the first place, in the way that independent people are, and that it came out in such a lukewarm manner, really. And despite that, it was still pretty damning. But yeah.
Sure. Well, to be fair, she wasn't independent, I suppose, when she was asked to do it, because I think she had already been made a member of the House of Lords under the Labour Party. But Michael, we've excluded you so far. What did you think of this story?
I think that I have a hard enough time keeping up with the BS from the lying scumbag politicians in my own country than to try to follow yours. But I will say this: I hate high-profile apologies. Whenever somebody says something or offends people and they get called out on it and they go, I'm so sorry, I shouldn't have said it. This guy went so far as to say what I said was wrong, it was false, I apologize. How can anybody take that seriously? The fact that you apologized because you got caught, like, I don't know the world that these people live in, or the people that believe them. I just don't get it. Like, I cannot imagine a situation, right, where when I was in my leading my life of crime, where if the police came and caught me doing a crime and I said, listen, I apologize, right, that they would say, oh, okay, well, since you're sorry, all's forgiven. It's so obviously self-serving as to just blow one's mind. I just don't, I don't get it. It happens with actors, actresses, musicians, politicians, anybody in the public spotlight, radio hosts. They apologize once they're caught, and then everything is supposed to be forgiven. It's just ridiculous.
I can give you a kind of view of what kind of world this guy comes from. Rochdale, there was a scandal where a gang of Muslims and Asians were actually grooming white girls for sex. And it was known throughout the place, but every politician and member of the police kept it quiet because it was too controversial to talk about it. It was too racist to accuse a sector of the population, pointing the finger and saying these guys are behaving this way. And the guy,
for a decade or more, we're talking about.
And this guy was actually a councillor in the area, so it was right in the mud, right to his nose. So that's the kind of people we're dealing with, and that's the kind of people we're pretending we don't know about, because to say something like that is it's not politically correct.
Yes. My fiance is from that area of the UK, and she wasn't very surprised when she found out that the councillor from this area had been holding anti-Semitic attitudes, because it's not exactly uncommon there, unfortunately. But just since we're in the last 10 minutes, let's just talk about then, so what do we do about this? Because we were discussing that, this is clearly a more endemic problem in the Labour Party, but then also Michael and I were just saying on the Daily Objective, something that we've seen since October 7th is that clearly there's a deeper problem in the culture generally, let alone in just the Labour Party. So how, and my attitude towards it was that anti-Semitism was a kind of dead prejudice. There were crazy people who were anti-Semites, but that it wasn't a widespread kind of issue in our culture anymore. And that may have just been my own ignorance, but I was still genuinely shocked. So how do you deal with this? Whether we're going to talk about just in the context of the Labour Party or in our culture generally, what do you do about rising anti-Semitism, because as Michael, as you say, this guy's apologized, but clearly it seemed plausible enough to him that he could just make up this kind of anti-Semitic sounding kind of conspiracy theory. Oh yeah, Israel let it happen. Very much similar to kind of a 9/11 truther perspective, right? So what do we do about this? Michael or Mark and Richard, whoever speaks first, you get the spotlight.
I think that there's no solution to such people. I mean, ultimately, all you can hope to do is spread a philosophy of reason, hope enough people pick it up so that we can eradicate this type of stuff from our culture and push these people to, the corners of the society where they belong. But politicians in general are dishonest people just looking to get elected, and will say and do whatever they need to have that happen. And until the populations hold these people accountable, they're going to keep doing it. But I'm not hopeful for people like this or for the anti-Jewish people out there. I just can keep doing what we do here, preach reason, hope it catches on. I don't, it's a pessimistic outlook. I mean, but I haven't seen any evidence that we're heading in the right direction.
Yeah.
To be honest, I mean, at this point, all you can do is to call it out when you witness it. And it's not even a political issue, because David Cameron doesn't need to be reelected. He's a lord. He's going to be there, unfortunately, for the rest of his days, and we'll have to put up with it for the rest of our days. But he's still saying things like, today, I think in Parliament said something like, Hamas want to destroy Israel, and then he's still pushing for a two-state solution. Now, in what world you can have a solution with one of the party want to destroy the other, and that's the reason to exist? So unless we recognize, as you said, unless we start looking at things rationally, how can you possibly find a solution to anything? But for the moment, all we can do is just call it out.
Yeah. My missing neurons finally turned up for work, so I've just remembered what that organization's called. It's called Amnesty, the one that I was equating liberty.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, I think what can you do about it? Well, it's hard to say, because the problem runs so much deeper. I mean, at the moment, what Starmer's trying to do is he's simply trying to win power. He'd much prefer the Labour Party was not in the news at all. He'd prefer he was not in the news at all. He just wants to win power, so that, and then worry about afterwards all the various groups that support him, then deal off between them, bribe one here, bribe the other there, use the pull hierarchy after the fact, once those votes are secured and he's got the job. So at the moment, absolutely nothing can be done. And the Labour Party, who's normally like the Stasi of policing other people's speech, is clearly gone very quiet when it comes to lots of the things that are actually said behind closed doors when they don't realise they're being recorded. But a quick apology doesn't negate the essence of how you really think. And it's how you really think that is a problem, and it's how you really think that's being revealed in moments like this. I just pity the people of Rochdale with the lousy set of candidates they've got, including George Galloway, standing in their constituency. And it would really be a good opportunity to utterly spoil the ballot and have spoiled ballots win the day.
Yes. So, and unfortunately, it seems like the Labour Party is going to win the next general election. Most people aren't in doubt about that. So Keir Starmer will be the future Prime Minister. And he's bringing into power a party which seems to have this deep running issue. Now, it isn't exactly like the Conservative Party is a shining light for lacking prejudice of all sorts, let alone anti-Semitism. I've heard a Tory politician at dinner once make an anti-Semitic joke in front of me. But the Labour Party clearly has a deep running issue with this. And it isn't clear that there is any short-term cure, I guess. Perhaps once they're in power, the public scrutiny will be so intense on them that they will really have to perform a kind of purge of this. I agree with your shaking head, Marco, in the sense that I'm doubtful of that, but maybe it will turn up the spotlight on them a bit. But in a more significant sense, the reason why the Labour Party is like this is because for a long time, the left has had a problem with anti-Semitism and has not really addressed it. I was reading Hannah Arendt's book on anti-Semitism recently, and even in there, she's referring, which she wrote in 1950, she's talking about the left having an anti-Semitism problem. And perhaps that's not the same form of it as we're getting today, but presumably it's a kind of continuation, or that's just a predecessor of the problem we have today. So there's a really long-standing issue of the left not cleaning up its own act, so to speak. And I think partly that goes to this kind of perception the left has of itself, that it is the side of anti-prejudice, it is the side that is kind of whiter than white, that is the moral side, which couldn't possibly be prejudiced in any way. And I think for people who are of the left, they need to really have a hard look at themselves and say, look, clearly there's something rotten here, and we need to do something about it. And until they do that, the Labour Party, which is made up of left-wing people, is probably not going to change, which is the disheartening truth. Okay. Anything else to say, guys, before we wrap up?
Not really. No, it's just the fact that in this age where people can hold different truths and claim my truth and your truth, and that's part of the problem. That allows people to entertain contradictions when talking about the same thing, and that it leads us to where we are.
Yes, absolutely. So we'll wrap up the show, guys. Thank you so much for watching. At 7 p.m. UK time, we have the Fountainhead Book Club, which is for Ayn Rand Centre UK members. Daniel's saying he's posted a link to that in the chat, so you can sign up. And those are always really great. And if anyone's not read the Fountainhead, that'd be a great way to get into it. And we have all the previous recordings of the book club available as well. So I really hope some people go over and join for that. And we'll see you guys tomorrow for the Daily Objective and the reality show. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Morgan.